Democrats conducting an impeachment inquiry are looking into one of President Trump's closest allies.
The president's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, has been at the center of White House efforts to get Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden, one of the president's political rivals. Even as the controversy has built, Giuliani continues to push unsubstantiated claims like the one we are about to hear, which is from Fox News last night.
Joe Biden was sent to Ukraine to in part deal with corruption, and he helped to corrupt the Ukraine. He is a laughingstock. We are.
Again, no evidence of that whatsoever. Now, a House committee wants to know more about the role that Giuliani has played in talking with Ukrainian officials, and House leaders have issued a subpoena for documents related to his communications with Ukraine.
NPR Justice reporter Ryan Lucas has been following all this as it develops. Good morning, Ryan.
Good morning.
So why was Rudy Giuliani subpoenaed?
Well, as you said, Giuliani has been the man in the middle of this. He's pushing these allegations against Biden for months. In its subpoena, the House Intelligence Committee says that it is looking into allegations that Giuliani acted as an agent of President Trump in what they call a scheme to advance Trump's personal political interests by abusing the power of the office of the president. This is a subpoena for records at this point. It's not for testimony. Lawmakers are asking for documents related to Giuliani's communications with Ukrainians. I've asked Giuliani about this subpoena. He told me in a text message last night that lawmakers aren't even making a pretense of fairness in all of this. And he says that in the subpoena, there's quite a lot to consider.
So how did Giuliani get involved in all this in the first place?
Giuliani says that he first got wind of the Biden allegations about a year ago. And since then, he's met with Ukrainians to, as he puts it, to try to gather evidence that would clear his client. And his client, of course, is President Trump. A key meeting in his efforts took place in early August in Spain. That is where he met with a senior advisor to Ukraine's president. He gave this advisor information that he had collected about Biden and Biden's alleged improprieties. Important to say, again, that Giuliani's allegations are unproven, and in fact, the evidence actually contradicts it. Giuliani says that this meeting in Spain was facilitated by Kurt Volker. At that time, Volker was the U.S. Special Representative to Ukraine under the State Department. Volker resigned on Friday. He's actually going to sit down with House investigators this week for an interview.
Why would Kurt Volker, who works for the State Department, help set Giuliani up with Ukrainian officials?
That is a good question. Broadly speaking, Volker's role at State was to help support Ukraine in its democratic reforms. There has been a lot of negative news about Ukraine over the past year, about its corruption, a bunch of other things. The conservative media here in the U.S. has really zeroed in on that, and Giuliani has as well. And Giuliani has been very vocal about that. The Ukrainian government contacted Volker and asked him to put them in touch with Giuliani. Now, it's my understanding that Volker facilitated that in part because it would give the Ukrainians a chance to show Giuliani on their own that the new government in Kiev under President Zelensky, that it has the right priorities, that they were the good guys, so to speak. Basically, Ukraine could correct the record with Giuliani, and that was important because Giuliani, of course, is close to President Trump.
Yeah. Let me ask you about a last development here. So at this point, multiple news outlets are reporting that President Trump asked the Prime Minister of Australia to help Attorney General William Barr as the Justice Department looks into why the Russia investigation started. Can you just explain what's going on there?
Right. The U.S. Attorney in Connecticut, John Durham, has been looking into the origins of the Russia investigation. We've known that for a while. After this story broke last night, the Justice Department put out a statement saying that it was Barr who asked the president to contact foreign countries and put the Attorney General and Durham in touch with the appropriate officials. This is unusual. There are a lot of other channels to do this normally. When the president makes the request, of course, it takes it up a level. But this also raises questions because President Trump, of course, has a personal political interest in the outcome of Durham's investigation.
NPR's Ryan Lucas. Thanks so much, Ryan.
Thank you.
All right, China is celebrating 70 years of communist rule today.
Yeah, the People's Republic of China was founded in 1949 at the end of a long civil war. Today, a much stronger China puts its power on display. The government rolled tanks and drones and a nuclear-capable missile through Tiananmen Square in the heart of Beijing. The scene is very different more than 1,000 miles away in Hong Kong, where demonstrators have again marched in favor of democracy today. And we have reporters in both places.
Yeah, let's start with Elsa Chang, the host of All Things Considered, who's in China. She's in Beijing. Hey, Elsa.
Hey, well.
So we heard that sound from the big military parade. What did you see? How close were you able to get?
Well, we were able to get within less than a mile of Tiananmen Square, which is where the festivities were happening. But our press credentials to cover the event did not let us go to the actual event. In fact, most foreign media were not invited. And that lack of access went for most of the people in Beijing. What we saw were people sitting around in beach chairs on the sidewalk as if they were waiting for festivities to pass on by. But everyone was just watching the celebration huddled in groups around their tiny screens on their iPhones.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, there
Bummer.
were roadblocks all around, police officers. Only a very, very specific guest list was allowed at the actual celebration site.
Okay. So you went to China to coincide with the 70th anniversary. And I wonder, what was it that you wanted to look into while you're there?
I wanted to look at what promises the Chinese Communist Party made 70 years ago and what promises have they made good on. Because, you know, in a lot of ways, the CCP is a party of contradictions. It was once the party of revolution. It's now become the establishment here. It's communist in name, but it is not the party of the proletariat. It is the party of state capitalism. And it's a party that has promised to lift people out of poverty, which it has done an absolutely spectacular job of. In fact, it's lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. But at the same time, income inequalities have intensified over the last few decades. And part of our reporting here has been trying to understand how those inequalities have played out over different generations within different classes of people.
So tell me about some of the people you met.
Well, we spent some time with migrant workers who had moved to Beijing about 30 years ago from the countryside. And these are guys who work 7 days a week, 10 hours a day, but they say their lives are hundreds, even thousands of times better than their parents' lives. Those are their exact words. And that gets to one of the party's central promises, which is, if you work hard and you trust us, we will make your life better. And that message we saw is resonating with people from totally different backgrounds here. Like, here's an architect. She lives in Beijing. Her name's Grace Jing. She's 28.
So I don't care who is the leader in China.
Do you really not care, or you just know you can't choose anyway?
Maybe both. But just in China, maybe we know the leader would make steady, wise choice, unlike the United States.
So what she's saying is all she wants is stability in order to focus on her career and on success. And she says that is exactly what the government is giving her.
You know, this is a rocky time for the Chinese government. It's in a trade war with the U.S. You got these protests in Hong Kong. Is Xi Jinping addressing any of this today?
Well, he mainly stayed on the idea that China is here to stay. I mean, the Soviet Union lasted 69 years, and China is at 70 years now. It's still going strong. And today, President Xi Jinping said no force can shake the status of our great motherland.
NPR's Elsa Chang. For more from her on China, tune into All Things Considered later today. Elsa, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
All right, now we're going over to Hong Kong to get a sense of how protesters there are responding to the celebrations on the mainland today. NPR's Julie McCarthy is on the ground. Hey, Julie.
Hi there.
Okay, so we were expecting unrest in Hong Kong. How have things played out? What have you seen?
Well, it promised to be that, and it kept to that promise. The defiance is widespread, and it is violent today. These are the kind of optics that we're seeing that are in stark contrast to what's going on in Beijing. In Kowloon, across the harbor, there are ongoing clashes between police and protesters. Further afield, in the new territories, they are inflamed. Here on the island of Hong Kong, thousands of protesters marched in what was largely a peaceful demonstration in defiance of a police ban, it must be said. But I can now hear and see police firing tear gas and hundreds of people turning around and running back up the road. This was after hours of a peaceful protest. And earlier, a whole cross-section had snaked through the island shouting, "Stand with Hong Kong." And the message from across all these generations is that they want the autonomy and the freedoms they were promised when Britain handed back Hong Kong to China in 1997. And now, while that's a local grievance, one of the leaders of the march, former lawmaker Lee Chuk-young, cast it in terms of a global struggle. Here he is.
If the people of Hong Kong win against dictatorship, then it's also a lesson for the world that, with a spirit like the people of Hong Kong, we can finally overcome the impossible. People think that the regime is so powerful that it's impossible, but we can do the impossible if we continue to fight, and we have confidence in that.
Now, as for the violence and the vandalism, the more radical protesters see this as a principled stand. Others say, look, this is a doomed strategy that offers Beijing the pretext to march in here.
And so are people worried that Beijing might march in there? Are you hearing any of that today?
Well, no one really expected a broader crackdown involving reinforcements from across the border today. Beijing wanted its 70th anniversary to go off without a hitch, and the optics of having Chinese troops on the streets of Hong Kong would be completely contrary to that. So there was little expectation of that. But now, with China's National Day dispensed with, Hong Kong people do consider the fact that there are some 18 barracks housing troops from the People's Liberation Army in China with an estimate of anywhere from 3,000 to 12,000 troops. And the threat of them leaving their barracks to suppress the protest movement here is never far from people's minds.
NPR's Julie McCarthy. Julie, thanks so much.
Thank you.
House Democrats have been suggesting that their impeachment investigation could take just a matter of weeks, not months. But the White House is drawing battle lines as tensions between the executive and legislative branches are really increasing.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is one of the people leading this resistance. He's trying to delay 5 current and former officials from handing over documents and testifying in the impeachment inquiry.
And let's bring in NPR senior political editor and correspondent Domenico Montanaro. Hi, Domenico.
Morning, David.
So why this resistance from Pompeo? Why is he not letting these officials come in and testify right now?
Well, he wrote this letter to the House Foreign Affairs Committee saying that these individuals needed more time to prepare and get proper legal counsel. And he claimed that Democrats were trying to, quote, intimidate and bully these career officials, and he wouldn't have it. That's really, though, the kind of language that's used to try and win a message war. And Democrats interpreted it as an attempt to simply delay for President Trump. I mean, Democrats fired back at Pompeo. They said, in fact, he was the one potentially trying to intimidate witnesses, and that, quote, any attempt to prevent them from talking with Congress is illegal and will constitute evidence of obstruction of the impeachment inquiry. The timeline as we know it now is today the State Department Inspector General is expected to brief congressional staff about some of their document requests on the Ukraine matter. Democrats are going to depose behind closed doors Kurt Volker, a former envoy to Ukraine, tomorrow. And they rescheduled deposition with Marie Yovanovitch, who was the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. That was supposed to happen today. Instead, it's going to happen next week, October 11th, as a result of this letter.
But what about these officials who Pompeo is trying to hold up? What did lawmakers want specifically to know from them?
Well, I mean, Democrats are seeking closed-door testimony as part of the impeachment inquiry. With Yovanovitch, the way some of the things that Democrats are looking into, they want to know why she was removed from her post, what led up to it. The whistleblower complaint notes that she'd been a critic of a Ukrainian prosecutor, his poor record on fighting corruption, and the whistleblower notes that Rudy Giuliani, the president's personal lawyer, is on record saying that she was, quote, removed because she was part of the efforts against the president. In wanting to talk to Volker, it looks like it also centers around Giuliani. Volker resigned from a voluntary post at the State Department, and the whistleblower says that Volker was one of the officials who spoke with Giuliani in what the whistleblower calls an attempt to, quote, contain the damage to U.S. national security. He said Giuliani was trying to circumvent usual national security decision-making processes. And the complaint also says that Volker spoke with Ukrainian officials. He was trying to smooth out and reconcile the differing messages that were coming from Giuliani and through official U.S. channels. So the point here is for Democrats to kind of try to fill in the blanks, connect the dots, and figure out what's really going on.
Domenico, is all this making its way onto the campaign trail?
I mean, it's overshadowed everything on the campaign. The primary battle is really taking a back seat, and the candidates are saying they support impeachment inquiry or even the impeachment of the president overall. And they're trying to make some news, trickling out some of their fundraising numbers, but really impeachment has been the principal thing.
NPR's Domenico Montanaro. Domenico, thanks so much.
You're welcome.
All right. Does Harvard discriminate against Asian Americans in its admission process? A federal judge has now ruled no.
This case was one of the most serious legal challenges to affirmative action in years. The plaintiff is a group called Students for Fair Admissions. Now, they argue that Harvard holds Asian American applicants to a higher standard in the admissions process. Judge Allison Burroughs, who presided over the case, said Harvard's admissions process is, quote, not perfect, but she also said it's not unconstitutional.
Of course, this decision is not likely to end this fight. It could keep going on. Carrie Young reports for NPR member station WBUR in Boston and has been following this case. Good morning, Carrie.
Good morning.
So can you sort of summarize this ruling for us? What did the judge here say?
Yeah, well, the ruling was very detailed. It came in at around 130 pages yesterday. But what a lot of it boils down to is that she says Harvard's admissions office did not intentionally discriminate against Asian American applicants. So she dispelled any notions that the school might use a racial balancing system, which is kind of like a quota, and that's not legal under federal law. And she decided that Harvard did prove its case in court through personal testimony and also a lot of statistics, that race is not a deciding factor. It's not weighed too heavily. And as you mentioned, Judge Burroughs did note that Harvard's admission system is not perfect. In fact, she suggested the school consider implicit bias training. But she concluded by calling it a quote, fine system that she doesn't want to dismantle, especially because she says it serves a compelling interest, and that's maintaining diversity at one of the country's most selective schools.
So, I mean, as I mentioned, this might not be the end of this legal battle, but how are the two sides responding to this decision so far?
Well, in a statement, Harvard is calling the ruling a victory for students, diversity, and the rule of law, they say. Other groups who have been heavily involved with the case, on Harvard's side at least, are also celebrating this decision. I spoke last night with Rachel Kleinman. She's with the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund, which joined Harvard as a friend of the court last year. They represented student and alumni groups, and she says she's thrilled about this ruling because a case like this can make other schools rethink or at least reaffirm their affirmative action policies.
I think this is such a clear signal that they can continue to be doing this important work, to be admitting diverse classes. And I think this is a real victory for colleges and universities and the students who attend them across the country.
Now, for the plaintiffs, Students for Fair Admissions, they say they're very disappointed by this ruling, and they are planning to appeal and even prepared to take this case to the Supreme Court if necessary. In their statement, they said they felt like the data and the evidence they presented in court made a compelling argument.
And so if this does go to the Supreme Court, Carrie, what are some of the implications this could have on affirmative action more broadly?
Yeah, I mean, Edward Bloom, who's the president of Students for Fair Admissions, he's a well-known opponent of affirmative action, and his goal here is to end the consideration of race in admissions. Colleges and universities are worried if that becomes the case, that classes would be a lot less diverse across the country.
Carrie Young reports for member station WBUR in Boston. Thanks so much, Carrie.
You're welcome.
So it's been a month now since Hurricane Dorian devastated so much of the Bahamas.
Yeah, you might remember that this was a very slow-moving Category 5 storm. A couple of days after it hit land, our colleague Jason Beaubien made it to the island of Great Abaco to report on the destruction there.
Just walking around one neighborhood here this morning, we saw 4 bodies just out in the open. And in addition, there's really a smell in the air. Sometimes you're not seeing the bodies, but you're coming through rubble, and there's a very distinct smell of rotting human flesh.
All right, it was terrible then, and 4 weeks later, the situation there is still desperate, especially in the town of Marsh Harbor. That's the commercial hub of the Abaco Islands. And
Jason Beaubien has returned to see what life looks like now on the islands. And Jason, I remember that vivid description from just shortly after the hurricane. What are you seeing and hearing now that you've gone back?
Look, so the bodies have been cleaned up, but this is still absolutely a disaster zone. There's, debris everywhere still. The roads have been cleared, and you are getting bulldozers coming in and clearing like some of the shanty towns, and some of the schools are getting cleaned up. But, there are areas that are just completely empty, just eerily empty, just like looks like a tornado had come through, and there's just foundations and hardly anyone around. So it's still got a long way to go.
With that much destruction, how do you even prioritize? Like, what do you do first when it comes to trying to rebuild?
So right now it's just about sort of relief and rubble. Basically, there needs to be systems so that people can come here, work here, and deal with this next phase. So there's systems being put in place to just make sure people have some place to eat, trying to get people basic places to sleep under. And then this next big thing right now is dealing with all of this rubble, getting it out of the way. I talked to this guy, Sylvan McIntyre. He's actually from Grenada, and he's been running the Emergency Operations Center here in Abaco.
The removal of debris is critical. It's something that helps the psyche of people. It helps you feel that there's a sense of greater hope and there's a sense of things happening.
And they're working on trying to do that. They're working on lining up a huge area as a dump south of Marsh Harbor. And he says that they've signed some contracts and trying to get trucking companies to come in, and they're working on that process and trying to get that going to get this huge rubble removal operation moving.
Just facing all this, it's amazing to hear him say, a sense of greater hope. Are you feeling that? Are there signs of hope, or that things are somehow getting a little better?
Definitely there are signs of hope. There's also a lot of sort of uncertainty for people still. But, there is better access to water. There's still no electricity. Every store was destroyed, from grocery stores to marine stores. And that fact that there's no grocery stores is a huge problem. There's basically no restaurants. So people have to get food from somewhere. And one of the amazing things here is that Jose Andres' charity outfit, World Central Kitchen, has set up this massive operation to offer sandwiches and hot meals to anybody on the island. This is Sam Block. He's with World Central Kitchen.
It can make you feel like a human again. That's why for us, doing it on time and regularly is really important, so that there is some stability and some normalcy in an otherwise very chaotic situation.
And he says that can just come from just having a hot meal every day.
You think residents are going to stay and try to get back to some sort of normalcy at some point?
I think they're going to try to, but it is going to be a long haul.
It's NPR's Jason Beaubien, who has returned to report in the Bahamas in the wake of that hurricane a month ago. Thanks so much, Jason.
You're welcome.
House Democrats have told the Trump administration subpoenas are coming.
That's right. And the president, for his part, has continued to lash out as Congress moves forward with its impeachment inquiry. First, President Trump targeted House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff by accusing him of treason. And then Trump took to Twitter, where he broadened his focus to the Democratic Party. He tweeted that they want to, quote, steal the election. All the while, the subpoenas of administration officials are mounting, and the first deposition of one of those officials will take place later today.
NPR national political correspondent Mara Liasson is on the line now. Good morning, Mara.
Good morning, Noelle.
So this story is moving really quickly, at points in fits and starts. But where do things stand right now with the White House and Congress?
The White House and Congress are in this epic battle over impeachment. Yesterday, both sides were trying to convince the public that they are doing the right thing. In the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and the Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff held a press conference. They wanted to prove that they could walk and chew gum at the same time. Nancy Pelosi talked about that the House was getting to yes on the USMCA. That's the updated NAFTA trade agreement. She talked about the bill the House passed in May to reduce drug prices that she wants the Senate and the president to take a look at. But they were both very tough about warning the White House what would happen if the White House refused to cooperate with their requests for witnesses and documents in the impeachment inquiry. Here's what Adam Schiff had to say.
We are concerned that the White House will attempt to stonewall our investigation, much as they have stonewalled other committees in the past. It's why I say the White House needs to understand that any action like that, that forces us to litigate or have to consider litigation, will be considered further evidence of obstruction of justice.
Okay, so that is Adam Schiff talking tough. President Trump is aggrieved. He made that really clear yesterday. He talked about a coup on Twitter. He cussed on Twitter. Is his behavior helping shift opinion on whether or not he did something wrong?
That is not clear yet. So far, the polls have shown a little uptick in the support for the impeachment inquiry. I wouldn't call it a groundswell yet. Yesterday, Donald Trump turned to his standard operating procedure whenever he's imperiled, only this one was a little higher octane. He said the press was corrupt. As you said, he accused the Democrats investigating him of treason. That's a capital crime punishable by death. He said Joe Biden was stone cold crooked. He even suggested that he might bring a major lawsuit to respond to the Mueller investigation. That's a little unclear how that would work. And the irony is that this is all a self-inflicted wound. He's the one who decided to release the transcript of the call with the president of Ukraine, which has fueled the fire of the impeachment inquiry. And instead of just pocketing the victory that Bob Mueller gave him and moving on, he has obsessively pursued this investigation of the investigators, trying to prove that the Mueller probe was a partisan witch hunt and that even his own intelligence and law enforcement community was wrong about Russian involvement in 2016. So he is fueling this fire.
I mean, and at this point, Congress looks likely to keep requesting documents and witnesses. President Trump did say yesterday that he's going to cooperate.
This is a fraudulent crime on the American people, but we'll work together with Shifty Schiff and Pelosi and all of them, and we'll see what happens.
I mean, if we look at how the president has acted in the past, does that seem likely, cooperation?
Well, the president has always tried to appear to be cooperative and fearless, like he has nothing to hide. And then in the end, he doesn't produce information. And his White House pretty much has stonewalled Congress in other investigations. But on this one, they have been turning over documents. They didn't fight to keep the whistleblower complaint secret. They did something unprecedented when they released the transcript. Usually, president and foreign leaders' conversations are not released to the public. And that might make it harder for them to withhold other pieces of information and documents that Congress is requesting.
NPR's Mara Liasson, thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, the next move in the inquiry is a closed-door deposition later today.
Posed is a diplomat. The man being deposed is a diplomat named Kurt Volker. Volker was the U.S. Special Envoy to Ukraine until he resigned last week. That was after the whistleblower complaint named him, alleging that he connected Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, to Ukrainian officials. Volker is going to be the first official to testify on the whistleblower charges fueling the impeachment probe. He'll appear in front of 3 congressional committees.
NPR's Michelle Kellerman has been following all of this. And Michelle, before we get to who Kurt Volker is, I want to follow up on something we talked about yesterday. The State Department's Inspector General planned to hand over some documents to Congress. He did, but it was not really what anyone expected. Can you explain what happened there?
Yeah, what they were shown was a package of documents containing what some described as debunked conspiracy theories about the former U.S. ambassador to Ukraine, the son of Vice President Joe Biden, and others. Last night on CNN, Trump's private lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, said, well, he sent over some of those documents to the State Department and was told that they were going to investigate this. And I should say, Noel, that this kind of smear campaign was certainly getting a lot of play in right-wing media at the time, so none of this was really a surprise. But since Marie Yovanovitch, the former ambassador, was abruptly fired in May, this provides some context to that, and she's one of the people who's expected to speak to the Hill committees on this impeachment inquiry.
And the man speaking today, Kurt Volker, who is he?
Well, he spent the last couple of years as a part-time U.S. envoy. His job was really to push back against Russian aggression in Ukraine and end the war help end the war in the east of the country. He has a strong background on the region. He was a foreign service officer who worked in President Bush's National Security Council and was Bush's ambassador to NATO at the end of the administration. He was also close to the late Senator John McCain and runs the McCain Institute in Washington.
And the whistleblower complaint says that Volker did what exactly?
Well, they say that he was helping the Ukrainian government navigate President Trump's demands. This was, if you think about this year, in Ukraine. You had a comedian, a political novice who won elections in Ukraine. That surprised a lot of people. At the same time, you have Rudy Giuliani, who has the president's ear with all of this effort to dig up dirt about Joe Biden's son and looking into the origins of the Mueller report. You have a president who's fixated on that. And Volker was setting up contacts between the incoming Zelensky government and Giuliani. So I think that's what the whistleblower means when they say that he was trying to help the Ukrainian government navigate President Trump's demands.
And just quickly, what do these congressional committees want to learn from him today? What are they going to ask?
Well, they're going to want to know if that's the accurate picture of that's what he was trying to do, and also whether he knew about the president's decision to hold up military aid to Ukraine during this time, and whether the president was using that aid as leverage to get dirt on his opponents.
Okay, so the big question. NPR's Michelle Kellerman. Thanks so much, Michelle.
Sure thing.
A former Dallas police officer has been sentenced to 10 years in prison.
Yeah, that was the sentence handed down to Amber Geiger yesterday after she was found guilty of murder. Geiger made headlines last year when she entered an apartment she thought was hers and shot and killed Botham Jean. It turns out she was in his apartment, one floor above her own.
Saida Hassan is a reporter with KERA in Dallas. She's been covering this story. Good morning, Saida.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
We're happy to have you. So there was a moment yesterday after the judge handed down Geiger's sentence when Jean's brother Brandt spoke. Let's listen to that.
I love you as a person. And I don't wish anything bad on you. I don't know if this is possible, but can I give her a hug, please? Please? Yes.
Can you talk about what it was like to be there for that extraordinary moment?
It was a truly stunning moment in the courtroom. Brandt Jean is Botham Jean's younger brother. He's 18 years old. And Brandt took the witness stand and, as you heard, addressed Amber Geiger directly. He told Geiger he forgave her and that he wanted the best for her because that's what his brother Botham would have wanted. And he asked Geiger to give her life to Christ. Brandt then stepped off the witness stand and embraced Geiger, gave her a hug. Geiger broke into tears. And just a moment later, the judge herself actually spoke to Geiger, hugged her, and handed her a Bible. So really stunning moments in court.
What was the reaction from people in the courthouse?
Well, while we had that moment of forgiveness inside, outside, many folks were upset with this 10-year sentence. Many people expected a much harsher sentence for Geiger for the murder conviction. There was a group of activists gathered outside the courtroom chanting "No justice, no peace" after the sentence was handed down. Folks were saying that this was disrespectful to the Jean family and that 10 years doesn't go far enough toward honoring Botham Jean's life. Botham Jean's mother, Allison Jean, also spoke with the press. She seemed to accept the length of the sentence, but she says that the work isn't over.
That 10 years in prison is 10 years for her reflection and for her to change her life. But there is much more to be done by the city of Dallas. The corruption that we saw during this process must stop.
Just briefly, in the seconds we have left, she mentions corruption. What is she talking about?
There was testimony that police may have deleted text messages, tampered with an in-car recording system. And so Dallas Police Chief Renee Hall spoke about those allegations, says she wants to launch an internal investigation and really rebuild trust with the community.
Okay, so this story will have a ripple effect, it sounds like, in the city of Dallas. Saida Hassan of member station KERA in Dallas, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Six pages of text messages reveal diplomats' conversations as President Trump sought the investigation of a political rival.
Right. So these are text messages from the summer involving State Department officials in Europe, and they're discussing how to manage the demands of President Trump. It's a period earlier this year. The president was withholding military aid from Ukraine and also asking Ukraine to investigate Democratic presidential candidate Joe Biden. As we'll hear, one diplomat warned the president's moves were good for Russia. He also said it was, quote, crazy to withhold security assistance for help with a political campaign.
House Committee Chairman released the text messages after hearing a long day of testimony from a former U.S. diplomat and other witnesses to come. And NPR congressional correspondent Susan Davis has been following all this. She's in our studios. Good morning.
Good morning, Steve.
What do you see when you read those text messages?
One word of caution is that these text messages are a partial disclosure of conversations involving 3 State Department officials, an aide to Ukraine President Zelensky, and in some cases, the president's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. Democrats are saying they plan to release the full text conversations after scrubbing them for personally identifiable information.
So we don't have everything.
We don't have
yet,
everything. But that said, much of it appears to corroborate the things that we already know. The July 25th phone call involving President Trump and Ukraine President Zelensky, and concerns about withholding U.S. military aid to Ukraine if investigations did not take place involving the 2016 elections and the Biden family and a company in Ukraine involving the vice president's son. There is one exchange in particular that's going to get a lot of attention. You referenced it already. On September 9th, Bill Taylor, who is a diplomatic official at the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine, sends a text message to George Sondland, who's the U.S. ambassador to the European Union, and he says, quote, I think it's crazy to withhold security assistance to help with a political campaign. Sondland replies, I believe you are incorrect about the President Trump's intentions. The president has been crystal clear, no quid pro quos of any kind. They then suggest they stop texting and talk over the phone. Democrats say that this information, among other information here, validates their impeachment investigation.
And clearly a disagreement there, but there is no doubt that the president was withholding military aid, was also asking for the investigation, and one, at least, closely involved diplomat saw a connection between the two. Now, at the same time they're getting these text messages, they were also getting, something like 9.5 hours of testimony yesterday. What did they learn from Kurt Volker, the diplomat who was being questioned?
He was a central figure in these text messages, so a lot of the information in here was discussed. There was also a lot of talk about the fact that the president's actions were seen as being beneficial to Russia. Another text from Bill Taylor in which he says, quote, the nightmare is they give the interview and they don't get security assistance in terms of the Ukrainians. And he says, the Russians love it and I quit. So clearly also foreign policy concerns raised here. We did hear from a couple of lawmakers who took part in that testimony. Here's what one Democrat had to say. This is Eric Swalwell from California.
We have ample evidence now that there was a requirement that President Zelensky investigate the 2016 election and the Bidens if he wanted to get a meeting.
I think we should also note, though, that Republicans are coming out of these conversations and have very different takeaways. They say they've heard nothing that changes their view that the president did nothing wrong. Here's Jim Jordan, a top Republican from Ohio.
Not one thing he has said comports with any of the Democrats' impeachment narrative. Not one thing.
So I get the. This is go.
Yeah, I mean, you can hear there that this did not bring Republicans and Democrats any closer together into agreeing under the terms of the impeachment investigation. The Democrats on the committee did say that they have further people that they'd like to talk to based on these conversations, and I think it's only gotten more complicated, not less.
Intelligence Community Inspector General today.
He will be on Capitol Hill today talking about his role in releasing the whistleblower complaint.
Susan, continue listening to your coverage. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
That's NPR Susan Davis. Okay, in Iraq, thousands of people have been protesting. They've been in the streets denouncing the prime minister, Adel Abdul Mahdi.
Right, and this is in defiance of a government-imposed curfew, and police fired tear gas and rubber bullets to break up the crowds. At least 20 people have died in these clashes this week. Hundreds of people have been injured, and the government has now cut off internet access.
Al Jazeera English correspondent Imran Khan is in Baghdad reporting on this story. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
And I just want to note this story will be new, I think, to people in the United States. We've certainly been absorbed with our own politics. So can you just tell us from the beginning, how did people come to protest? What are they protesting about?
Well, there was no real spark for this, and this is the most interesting thing. On Tuesday, what happened was there was a very, very small protest from a few very young people who went to Tahrir Square, which is the central square in Baghdad, and it was very quickly broken up. But then there was a call on social media made by these young people. There's only a few of them. And people heeded the call. And by about 3 o'clock local time, there were thousands of people in Tahrir Square. It surprised the government. It surprised the military. It surprised everybody. Now, the military then on Tuesday tried to crack down as hard as they could, try and disperse the protesters. They used live fire. They used water cannons and tear gas. That angered the people even more. And they decided that they wanted to come out in larger number. On Wednesday, the Iraqi army threw around a ring of armor around Tahrir Square, and a curfew then took place around 5 a.m. local time in the early hours of Thursday morning. But people have been defying it. People are out on the street. I'm speaking to you right now from a military checkpoint. We did have permission to be out in the streets to get to our office. However, we've been detained here whilst I'm speaking to you right now. And it just goes to show you how suspicious the army is of any movement on the streets. And I have to say, this is like locking down Washington, D.C. It's like the American government shutting down Washington, D.C.
I want to be sure of your condition, Mr. Khan. When you say you've been detained, do you mean you're just being held up, or they're actually like you're in custody?
No. We're just being held up. It's,
Okay.
Sorry, the British English.
No, that's quite all right. I just wanted to make sure that make sure that you were all right. It sounds like it's difficult to say who started this exactly, but is it clear what they are demanding from the government?
Well, there's now two things that they're demanding from the government. Initially, the protests were about very simple things. They wanted jobs, they wanted more opportunities, they wanted an end to corruption. That was the thing that was driving the protest movement. Now what's happened is because of the heavy-handed tactics used by the Iraqi security forces and the numbers of people dead, what people are demanding now is an end to this curfew, an end to the live fire on protesters, and an end to the quashing of the anger and the protest movement.
And I guess we should note it is Friday, a day of Friday prayers, a day off for many people, and often in that part of the world, a day of protest.
That's absolutely right. And people are very concerned that they might not be able to go and pray. Now, it's one thing to stop people protesting, but it's quite another to stop them from actually going to perform prayers.
Mr. Khan, thank you so much. That's Imran Khan of Al Jazeera English. He is in Baghdad. In Los Angeles, another powerful name in the entertainment industry is accused of sexual exploitation and fraud.
Yeah, a lawsuit filed here in L.A. yesterday is alleging that actor James Franco, along with 2 other men, ran an acting school that sexually exploited female students. Franco is an Oscar-nominated actor who stars in the HBO series The Deuce. The plaintiffs were former students at Studio 4, which has since closed. NPR spoke with both of them in exclusive interviews.
They spoke with NPR's Elizabeth Blair, who's on the line. Elizabeth, who are the plaintiffs?
Hi, Steve. The plaintiffs are 2 former students at Studio 4, Sarah Tither Kaplan and Tony Gall. There are a number of allegations in the suit. Would you like to hear about them?
Sure.
They allege that James Franco and the other defendants sexualized their power by dangling employment opportunities in front of female students in exchange for explicit nudity and sex. Another allegation has to do with money. Studio 4 charged tuition, $300. The complaint alleges that the school promised students they would get to audition for Franco's film projects, and in doing so, the complaint alleges the school circumvented California's pay-for-play regulations, which prohibits charging actors for auditions. And the lawsuit goes on. The students who were willing to disrobe and perform sex scenes were rewarded with opportunities to work on Franco's film projects.
Okay, you can see how someone would be taken advantage of in that situation. What did the plaintiffs, the women who filed the lawsuit, say to you, Elizabeth?
So James Franco taught a sex scenes masterclass, and students had to audition to take the class and pay an extra fee if they were accepted. One of the plaintiffs, Sarah Tither Kaplan, says she jumped at the chance to audition and was thrilled to be accepted because she really wanted to be in a class with James Franco. She alleges the class was not about learning guidelines or best practices when performing in a sex scene, but about getting naked and doing sex scenes. She alleges this was an abuse of power because most of the female students were just starting out in their careers. And this is what she said.
They knew who they were asking to do the improvised sex and nude scenes. They knew who was in their classes. And I think that's by design because it sort of protects them from any kind of real repercussions because they can just write us off as, nobodies.
And Tither Kaplan claims that female students who agreed to do nude sex scenes and took risks with their bodies were rewarded with opportunities to work with Franco.
What has James Franco had to say about all this?
His lawyer, Michael Plonsker, issued a statement that reads, "This is not the first time that these claims have been made and that they've already been debunked. As of last night," Plonsker writes, "they had not had an opportunity to review the complaint." The statement goes on to say that Franco will, quote, "not only fully defend himself, but will also seek damages from the plaintiffs and their attorneys for filing this scurrilous publicity-seeking lawsuit."
Okay. Elizabeth, thanks for your work. Really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
That's NPR's Elizabeth Blair.
Another witness has information about President Trump and his dealings with Ukraine.
Lawyers for the first whistleblower who filed an intelligence complaint say they're now representing a second person. That person says they have firsthand knowledge of the phone call between President Trump and Ukraine's president. This is the call, of course, that triggered an impeachment inquiry into the president.
And let's talk about this by NPR White House reporter Aisha Roscoe is with us this morning. Hi, Aisha.
Good morning.
Okay, now a second person coming forward, it sounds like. What are they alleging and how different is it from what we seem to know so far?
So they're saying that this second person is corroborating some of the allegations from the first whistleblower. And as you said, I'm sorry, I'm getting bad feedback. I can't.
Okay.
Yes, I'm hearing myself.
Okay, you know what, Aisha, stay with us. We'll come back to you in a minute, but I want to turn to another story at this point, and it takes us to northern Syria, where the United States is now stepping aside, and Turkey's military is about to enter that area. This is a really complicated story, so we should recall some of the basics here. The United States has been fighting in Syria alongside local allies against ISIS. Key U.S. allies in northern Syria include ethnic Kurds, who we've reported on a lot. But that same ethnic group is regarded with suspicion by neighboring Turkey, which has a Kurdish population and where some Kurdish groups are labeled as terrorists. Well, now in part of Syria, the United States moves out. Turkey goes in. The White House is saying it will neither support nor be involved in the Turkish operation, but it's not going to get in the way either. And let's go to NPR's Peter Kenyon in Istanbul. Good morning, Peter.
Hi, David.
So the Kurds, so important here. They've been allies of the United States, but you have two NATO allies, Turkey and the U.S., with completely opposite views of these Kurdish fighters. Why is that?
Well, since the mid-1980s, the Turkish military has been fighting Kurdish militants from a group known as the PKK, the Kurdistan Workers' Party. Now, these Syrian Kurdish fighters are a different group, but they share some of the same ideology. And for Turkey, there's basically no difference. They say they're all anti-Turkish terrorists. Turkey's never been happy that the Pentagon partnered with the Syrian Kurds in their efforts to clear Islamic State's so-called caliphate in Syria. But then President Trump, when he declared victory over ISIS and said U.S. troops are coming out, that left these Syrian Kurdish fighters with a pretty uncertain future. Now Erdogan says all preparations for a Turkish military operation are now complete, and the White House statement confirms that it believes Ankara will be going ahead with it.
But help me understand this even more here. I mean, aren't Turkish and U.S. militaries, the two of them carrying out joint operations in the area, working together to secure parts of northern Syria, despite this different view of the Kurds?
Yes, absolutely. There have been joint patrols, 3 of them so far. The Pentagon has always said it takes Turkey's security concerns seriously. There have been ongoing talks focused on creating a safe zone in northern Syria, but there's some serious disagreement. Turkey wants that zone to be bigger than the U.S. envisioned, nearly 20 miles deep into Syrian territory, roughly 300 miles wide. And now this latest statement from the White House makes clear, as you mentioned, that the U.S. armed forces aren't supporting any Turkish operation, won't be involved in it, but it also basically says, hey, these Syrian Kurdish allies will now have to fend for themselves. And the Kurdish-led Syrian Defense Forces have responded with the statement confirming the U.S. withdrawal is underway and adding that this failure to meet U.S. commitments will have a great negative impact on the fight against Islamic State forces.
Why now, Peter? What is the timing of this?
Well, there is this question of a perceived threat from the Kurdish fighters that Turkey sees just across the border. But also here in Turkey, there's serious pressure to do something about 3.6 million Syrian refugees in Turkey. That's the official figure. And President Erdogan has said as many as 2 million refugees could be relocated to northern Syria once it's safe. So that's certainly part of the motivation.
All right, NPR's Peter Kenyon in Istanbul. Peter, thanks so much.
Thanks, David.
Okay, now for more on these impeachment developments, we're joined by NPR White House reporter Aisha Roscoe. Hi, Aisha.
Good morning.
Okay, so as we mentioned, a second person has now come forward, apparently with knowledge of President Trump and Ukraine. What are they alleging, and is the information that we're getting from this person new?
Well, so they're saying that this second person is corroborating some of the allegations from the first whistleblower. And as you said, that this person has direct knowledge of some of those things that were talked about in the original complaint. We don't know the specifics of that at this point. But this is significant because President Trump and his supporters have attacked the first whistleblower's account as just hearsay. I should be clear that this second person hasn't actually filed a separate complaint, but they did talk to the Inspector General of the intelligence community. And the lawyers representing this whistleblower say that that is enough to provide them with legal protection from retaliation. Another potential wrinkle in this news is that one of the lawyers representing that first whistleblower and tweeted that I can confirm that my firm and my team represent multiple whistleblowers in connection with this August 12th, 2019 disclosure, which is basically the complaint. It's unclear if multiple means more than 2. Based on the English language, it means more than 1. So it could just be the 2 whistleblowers that we're talking about, or we don't know if it means that there's more than the 2 that we've been talking about.
Interesting. Well, the emergence of a second whistleblower, does that change the impeachment inquiry that is taking place in Congress right now in some way?
It gives it more momentum. And there's a long way to go. None of us know where this will end up, but these allegations are not going away anytime soon, especially when you have more people coming out about them and possibly adding to that first complaint or adding some weight to that first complaint. And it provides another avenue for Democrats to investigate.
Democrats to investigate, but one of the big questions here is whether there would ever be a big crack in the Republican Party. If you ever saw any number of Republicans abandoning President Trump, how are Republicans reacting to this fresh news so far?
Most Republican lawmakers are defending Trump and arguing that the president raised legitimate concerns during that July call with Ukraine's president, which is at the center of this. Senator Ron Johnson last week had raised some eyebrows because he said that he'd heard before all of this became public that Trump might be holding up aid to Ukraine over this desire for an investigation into the 2016 election by Ukraine. He said that Trump had denied this to him, but he basically yesterday was saying he wouldn't go into details about that, but he did attack the press and argue that Trump had been mistreated.
There is potential interference in the 2016
Let me
campaign.
ask you this.
That's what Trump wants to get to the bottom of, but the press doesn't want to.
Ambassador,
the people who wrote this article are being pilloried. I'm being called a conspiracy theorist because the press is horribly biased.
So we should be clear that U.S. intelligence agencies have concluded that Russia interfered in the 2016 election, and there's no evidence at this point about these theories that Ukraine was somehow involved in the interference in the 2016 election.
All right, NPR White House reporter Aisha Roscoe. Aisha, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
It looked like there was a glimmer of progress over the weekend, but that did not last long for nearly 50,000 striking auto workers.
Yeah, on Sunday, the United Auto Workers Union said that contract talks with General Motors had taken a, quote, turn for the worse. The union has been on strike over wages and the company's reliance on temporary workers since mid-September. That makes this one of the biggest and longest strikes for a private company in some 50 years.
All right, Michigan Radio's Dustin Dwyer has been following the story, and he joins us this morning from Grand Rapids, Michigan. Hi, Dustin.
Good morning.
So how did these all-important talks deteriorate over the last few days?
Well, what we understand, the information we're getting is from the UAW's Vice President, Terry Dittis, who sends letters to members to update them. And on Friday, he sent a letter saying that the talks had made good progress. And it was a great sign because it's been more than 3 weeks now. We're heading into our fourth week of the strike, and there hadn't been a lot of talk of good progress. But on Friday, they said there was good progress. By Sunday, that had completely changed. In his latest update on Sunday, he said that the union had sent its latest proposal to General Motors. He claimed that proposal included things like wages, signing bonus, job security, pensions, skilled trades, and other things, he says. But when he says that GM got back to the union, it didn't respond to any of those things in the union's latest proposal and instead just reverted back to GM's previous proposal that had been on the table. Now, GM says it's proposed to invest $7 billion, create 5,400 new jobs, invest in plants in Michigan and Ohio. It says it's negotiating in good faith and will continue to do so. But for right now, it certainly seems like things aren't going well.
And as the strike goes on and on and on, which matters to workers and families, obviously, what are people on the picket line telling you at this point?
Well, I was there last week when they picked up, a lot of workers picked up their first strike check. They're now eligible for their second strike check. Their strike pay is only $250 per week, which is not a lot to live off of. One guy told me it wouldn't even cover half of his propane bill. So it's just really starting to hurt workers at this point. It's really starting to be felt financially, both by the individual picketers on the line and by people who work at suppliers. There's been more suppliers doing layoffs, and the longer this goes, you can imagine it cascades farther and farther down the supply line. It starts to affect more and more businesses and hit more and more pocketbooks.
And what briefly is important to the workers on the picket line? What do they feel like they're fighting for most passionately?
Well, the thing that people say to me most is temporary workers. These are workers who are hired into GM but have no real recourse or benefits to stay on. They could be fired at any time. And the workers on the picket line say they really want to resolve that issue and get more security for these temporary workers.
Dustin Dwyer from Michigan Radio joining us from Grand Rapids, Michigan this morning. Dustin, thanks so much.
Thank you.